Okay, week 13, Monday, I'll be reflecting upon pages 58 through 74. And just a reminder that tonight is when your questions are due, the Part 1 questions on reading, diction, and syntax and figurative language. And then B-Day students, we've already talked about Venn diagrams, as long as my plans went according to plan. And A-Day students, we'll talk about those today. So anyways, pages 58 through 74. Let's get to it. Now, you may have found yourself, if you ended page 57 and were like, oh my gosh, they're about to die, kind of flipping to the next page and being like, wait, what? So the fact that the book skips the murder, we're thinking like, okay, the criminals are pulling up to the house, so the next thing that we see is going to be them entering the house, and then we'll see what happens. No. The murder scene is saved for many, many pages, and we do not find out exactly what happened that night until much, much later. And even when we do find out exactly what happened that night, then there's kind of some conflicting accounts of certain details, and this is real life, so, it gets complicated. So, we get this little segue, I guess, from the next morning instead of that night. So this is Sunday, November 15th, and it was customary for a new Nancy Ewelt, to ride to church with the Clutters. But when they are not receiving a response at the Clutter house, well, they could have just busted in, but I don't know. So they go over to the teacherage to talk to Susan Kidwell, who, remember, is Nancy's best friend. So we get a statement from Nancy starting near the bottom of page 59. And so then they head over there, and we're waiting. We know what's about to happen, and we start to see the details that are wrong. So already the fact that the family wasn't up was unusual, and the fact that the door to Mr. Clutter's office was partly open, that's another detail that indicates that something is strange. The cars are still there. Then Susan tells us this new detail, Nancy's purse lying on the floor, sort of open. There were no dishes, which, we know why there's no dishes, but that's a detail that stands out to Nancy. And then we get the discovery moment. Susan Kidwell looks into Nancy's room and screams. She doesn't really remember it. She kind of blocks out this moment a little bit. The only thing that she really sees is Nancy's little teddy bear staring at her. And then she sees her friend Nancy and what's happened to Nancy. Now, the other Nancy Ewelt, very correctly identifies what's happened. But one of the first reactions that people always have to a horrible tragedy of some kind, and this is on page 60, is denial. That's always, a phase of grief that people go through, is denial. And Susan is in hardcore denial. So even though she screamed, even though she ran away, she can't bear to say what's happened. She says, it's only a nosebleed. She has them all the time, terrible nosebleeds, and that's all it is. Of course, Nancy protests. She's like, there is no nosebleed that would cause that much blood on the walls. I just don't understand. No, I don't think she's okay. And then we get one final detail of the initial impressions. A telephone receiver, it was off the hook, and the line had been cut. So obviously no cell phones back in the day, all telephones connected to lines, and this one was not functional anymore. So that's our first indication, of course, that something has gone wrong. Now, this next section is narrated by an individual who pops in for the section and then never shows up again. Larry Hendricks is a teacher. He was actually Nancy's teacher, and he gives us the details on the crime scene, which is probably better than having like Susan or someone tell us about the details, because he, as a more objective observer, would be able to notice things in a different way. Now, I do want to draw your attention before we get to the crime scene, one little comment on page 61. So about 3/4 of the way down the page, Mrs. Kidwell, Susan's mother, when she hears that something may have happened to the family, she says, oh, Bonnie, what happened? You were so happy. You told me it was all over. You said you'd never be sick again. So immediately, when they hear something has happened to the family, not knowing exactly what happened, the initial suspect in Mrs. Kidwell's mind is Bonnie. Bonnie has a history of severe mental illness. So Mrs. Kidwell is thinking, oh, she's finally cracked. She killed the whole family and herself, and that's it. So it's a sad commentary, that Mrs. Kidwell, I'm sure it was one of Bonnie's friends, but she recognized how seriously ill Bonnie was. It wasn't just some little nervous spells; it was a serious issue. But she is wrong, of course. Bonnie did not kill the family. So, going on to the next page, page 62, this is where we start to get a note of all of the details. Okay. Actually, I had that backwards. He was Kenyan's English teacher, and he directed Nancy in the play. Anyways, so he knows the kids. He knows, a little bit about them. Okay, so details. Lady's purse lying on the floor. That's Nancy's purse. Phone where the wires had been cut. Bad. Wrong. We get the details about Nancy's death, that she'd been shot in the back of the head with a shotgun held maybe 2 inches away. So you can imagine the kind of damage that would do. The wall was covered in her blood. Now, her clothing is interesting, too. She was wearing a bathrobe. Not many people wear bathrobes to bed, so that made Mr. Hendricks think that she hadn't gone to bed yet, that maybe she had just finished that last little diary entry when she perhaps heard something. Her hands tied behind her, ankles roped together with cord, so that's consistent with the supplies that were bought from the store in Emporia, Kansas. Another little detail. The bed covers were drawn up to her shoulders. Now, if Nancy was tied up, hands and feet, it's not like she, pulled the bed covers up to her shoulders. So that's an interesting kind of erroneous detail there that doesn't quite make sense with the brutality of the rest of the crime scene. Okay, so that's our first room. Now, the next room they investigate is a bathroom. And there's a chair in the bathroom, a dining room chair that obviously did not belong in a bathroom. So that's our next detail. Then we get to Kenyan's room. Kenyan's glasses are on a bookshelf beside the bed. Now, interesting thing, of course, we know that Kenyan cannot see, cannot function in any way, shape, or form without his glasses. It is highly unlikely that he would have exited his own bed and left his glasses. So he's not there. So Kenyan's bedroom is empty, but they do find Mrs. Clutter tied a little differently, hands in front of her, gripping a handkerchief. Her wrists were connected to her ankles, very complicated, very intricate rope work. So we can probably assume that maybe Perry had something to do with this since he had some experience with ropes. Her mouth had been taped with adhesive. The tape had been ripped loose, though. No cartridges at the scene. And then downstairs, they looked in Mr. Clutter's room, because you remember Mr. Clutter and Mrs. Clutter have separate bedrooms. And this, and I should update you on pages, sorry. So we're on page 63 now, the section on Mr. Clutter. And he had a billfold with a mess of cards spilling out of them, like someone had shuffled through them hunting something particular. So the people who were investigating think, well, maybe these men were looking for a note. Maybe they were looking for an IOU. Mr. Clutter was infamous for never carrying cash. Mr. Hendricks commented, I've only been here a little more than 2 months, and I knew that too. So his initial impressions is, well, the men couldn't have been after money, or, the people who did this doesn't know exactly who it is, but they couldn't have been after money because Mr. Clutter never carried cash, so they must have been looking for something else. We also get Mr. Clutter's glasses also sitting on a bureau, so they must not have been there of their own accord. The telephone is off the hook in the office as well, in addition to the kitchen, wires cut. The shotguns used were not the shotguns of the Clutter family. So at this point, they have 2 bodies that they've discovered, Mrs. Clutter and Nancy, and they don't know where Mr. Clutter and Kenyan are. So then they go down to the basement. So in the basement, they find Kenyan lying on the couch. He is also gagged with adhesive tape and bound hand and foot, just like his mother. Kenyan had been shot in the face, just like Nancy and his mother, although Nancy, I guess, had been shot in the back of the head. He was wearing clothes, but they got the impression that maybe he dressed in a hurry. His head was propped by a couple of pillows, and initial theories thought, well, maybe these pillows were stuffed under him to make him an easier target in some way. So they found Kenyan, and then they investigate the furnace room, which is, of course, the warmest room in the house. So Mr. Clutter had been shot, but his throat had been cut too. So he's the only one who sustained injuries significantly different from the rest of the families. He was wearing pajamas, hadn't had a chance to get dressed. His mouth was also taped. So out of the 4 members of the family, the only one whose mouth was not taped was Nancy. The other 3 were taped. His ankles were tied together, but his hands, it looked as if he'd managed to break the cord binding his hands. He was on a cardboard box, and it looked like it had been laid there specifically for him to sit on. Now, another detail on the mattress box, there was a blood-stained footprint. So one of the killers left behind a footprint. Someone stepped in blood and left that footprint behind. Now, there was a steam pipe overhead, and there was a piece of cord hanging to it. So initial theories were that Mr. Clutter had been tied up there and then cut down, but they don't know why. So more and more details. Everyone starts arriving. The teacher is eventually kind of kicked out. We do get confirmed Alfred Stockling didn't hear anything because of the baby, the sick baby. They did hear Bobby Rupp go home, interestingly enough, but I assume they weren't on the lookout for anything else. And of course, Teddy wouldn't have made any noise if he had seen the shotgun that Dick and Perry brought with them to the scene of the crime. That takes us all the way to page 66. Sorry, I wasn't updating you on pages, get so into the details here. It definitely, a horrific crime has been committed in an area that is not used to dealing with crimes of this magnitude or this level of violence. So now we start to get reactions from the community. So we have this little bit at the Holcomb Depot with Mother Truitt and Mrs. Myrtle Clare, and get a little bit of, characterization and background on them. And then over on page 69 is where we get the reactions from these individuals. So learn a little bit about them, flesh out their characters, but 2 ambulances gone to the Clutters. That is a notable thing in this town. And the initial thought, of course, is it's Bonnie. She's having one of her spells. She needs an ambulance. And one of her spells, of course, again, that euphemizing kind of language. But 2 ambulances, they definitely know that that's more than just Bonnie. So Mrs. Clare reveals that Mr. Clutter is dead, and Bonnie and Nancy and the boy, somebody shot them. Now, she makes some kind of harsh comments about Herb Clutter. He was always in a rush, So the first thing she does is kind of speak ill of the dead, which is a little harsh. But when they get to the question of who shot them, these women, of course, have theories. They've been involved in the town and the community for some time. So first thought is the man in the airplane, the one Herb sued for crashing into his fruit trees. Maybe it was just, some neighbor or something like that. So anyways, their initial thought is someone they know. Their initial thought is vengeance. That's, the initial theories. Then we get some kind of larger reactions. We get the reactions from the insurance company. Woo! Insurance company is definitely surprised, shall we say. So the agent who visited Mr. Clutter earlier that day, when he heard about it, he hadn't even deposited the check yet. And that check, when deposited and when that paperwork's filed, is worth $80,000. So legally, they might have been able to get away with saying, oh, well, it was the first payment, hadn't been deposited yet, no big deal. But morally, you can imagine the negative PR would have been crippling to them if they had refused to honor the policy. Okay, and then other people reacting, Susan, Bobby, and you can imagine poor Bobby, the last one really to see the family alive. His reaction to hearing that, Nancy, who he loved so much, is dead. Just runs out of the house and just absolutely devastated, crying. So anyways, everyone's pretty shaken up. Now the interesting bit that we have here at the end, this very, very small thing that closes us out, these are the reactions of our murderers. So we don't know exactly what happened, but we know the end result. So Perry is sleeping with a gray portable radio beside him. He has fallen down on the bed, not even undressed, as though sleep were a weapon that had struck him from behind. A kind of ironically violent simile, considering, of course, what has just happened. His boots were soaking in a wash basin, and the water in the wash basin is pink tinted. So we have a pretty good indication of whose bloody footprints were on the mattress box with Mr. Clutter. Dick, on the other hand, he is eating dinner, hanging out with his family, kissing his mom, talking about his fake trip to Fort Scott, eating all the food. The only thing out of the ordinary for Dick is that he fell asleep during the game. So, seems quite his ordinary self otherwise. Not much of an emotional reaction. So, that's the end of part 1. So part 2 is going to follow the quest for the killers, these persons unknown who obviously authority figures are going to be seeking. So, that's that.